time and I couldn't. Anyway, good morning or evening or whatever time of day you find yourself in. My name's Carissa and I am super excited to have Alfie Kohn here. Is that how you say your last name?
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Kohn is an author, a lecturer, and basically like, I think the world's most outspoken critic of rewards and punishment as motivators. I guess, I don't know if I'm missing anything, but could you add a little bit to your bio? You've been on Oprah, you've been in the Times, you've been, I mean, basically everywhere.
Well, I write books and articles and give lectures and workshops on a range of topics having to do with education, parenting, and human behavior.
I think the thing that I was most interested, I saw a lot of your work is featured on parenting sites and blogs. And I think that for me, for this talk, I'd like to focus on sort of the broader human behavior aspect and a little bit less. I know that we probably have parents that are like, oh, shucks. I wanted to hear about parenting strategies, and we'll touch on that because I think that there's no way to talk about your work without talking about parenting. But I kind of wanted to start with how I was introduced by your work was Laurie Santos assigns your book to everyone who teaches at, or who takes classes at Yale. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. This is really switching the sort of paradigm. I think for a long time, I've been troubled with why do anything and what motivates you to be a good person, or how not to feel sad when you have negative consequences or don't get positive consequences. So I just wanted to kind of talk about, why do you think, to start off, why do you think, well, maybe we should start off by defining behaviorism.
Okay.
Sorry, totally
as an academic field, behaviorism began with John Watson and then more famously with B.F. Skinner, who did, I like to say that Skinner did most of his research with rodents and pigeons and then wrote most of his books about people. So the assumption is in behaviorism that there is only the behavior that can be seen and measured, and that all of our actions, like those of other organisms, and he equates us with other organisms like rats and pigeons, is a matter of the consequences that our actions produce in the environment, and that reinforcement is what leads us or anyone to repeat a behavior. The pop version of behaviorism, I mean, by the way, so the academic version of behaviorism as a theory has been completely repudiated, except for small holdouts of orthodox behaviorists in large state universities. Most of psychology has moved past this as a relic that's mostly just studied in the history of psychology, because we know so much more now about the depth of what human psychology is all about the motives and reasons and values that inform the behavior that we see on the surface, the limits of reinforcement theory. Serious thinkers don't take this seriously, but it has sort of leached into the soil of American culture, and behaviorism, despite its lack of theoretical integrity and empirical support, continues to be the leading assumption that people make in everyday life about raising children, teaching students, and managing employees, which is dangling goodies in front of people and saying, do this and you'll get that. Even though I think my book was Punished by Rewards, was probably the first to pull together what had already been a substantial empirical literature to show that that approach of manipulating people as if you were training pets isn't just disrespectful and isn't just not very effective in the long run, it's actually harmful.
So I think that for me, taking a step back, I think that where potentially we disagree is I'm not offended by people being pets or compared to pets. I think the thing that for me, it doesn't matter how complicated the system is. It's the respect piece? Or can you maybe, I think, talk about sort of, I think the reason behaviorism is so alluring is A, its simplicity, B, it's sort of, it mimics the sort of cause and effect we view in all aspects of our lives. But what is the difference, or what is the sort of defining characteristic that doesn't make this understanding of the world apply to parenting or leadership roles?
Well, first, we would have to say what makes it inappropriate and a misfit for dealing with humans in any arena. And then we can talk specifically, if you want, about how it plays out in particular parenting. When you talked about it's being appealing because it seems to mimic our assumptions of cause and effect, I think you put your finger on something, but cause and effect are part of the natural world. If the cause is that I let go of something I'm holding, it will fall to the ground. But human beings have the capacity to respond to reason, and to make decisions, to exercise autonomy in how they choose to react to the things that they encounter. By definition, any kind of use of punishment and reward that does indeed, as you say, invoke a kind of cause and effect approach is, I believe, inherently dehumanizing. And it tends not to work well, in part, not only because it isn't very nice or respectful, as we say, but also because it doesn't get to the heart of where our decisions and our actions come from. It stays on the surface. Now, there are basically two ways you can deal with people, to oversimplify a bit. You can do things to them, or you can work with them. Mm-hmm. Again, that's true in families, in schools, in workplaces, and elsewhere. There are two ways to do things to people. You can threaten them that you will make them unhappy. If you do this, here's what I'm going to do to you, which is punishment, or as we've been taught in the parenting literature to euphemistically refer to it, consequences, because that helps us feel better about making children feel bad. And the other way you can do things to people to control them is by saying to them, do this and you'll get that. So instead of a threat, it's a bribe. Instead of a stick, it's a carrot. And again, we use euphemisms. Instead of calling it control through seduction, as two researchers did, or sugar-coated control, which is what rewards and praise really are, yeah, we call it positive reinforcement, you know. And so what I try to do in my work, especially with parents and teachers, but with anyone who's interested in human behavior, is to understand the inherent limits of this, that it's not a function of which punishments we use or how we reward or on what schedule. The problem is inherent to this assumption that is based on a misunderstanding of motivation. To be brief about this, I don't care how motivated your kids are or my kids. I care how our kids are motivated. And what psychologists, other than this holdout of Skinnerians, have taught us in the last half century is there are different kinds of motivation, and the kind matters more than the amount. And the distinction that's usually made is between intrinsic motivation, which basically means you do something because you find it valuable or fulfilling or meaningful or joyful, and extrinsic motivation, which means you do something in order that something outside of or extrinsic to the task will happen, like you get a goodie. And what the research demonstrates is it's not just that intrinsic motivation, you know, reading a book because you get a kick out of reading, or helping someone because that person needs the help, or whatever. It's not just that intrinsic motivation is different than extrinsic. And it's not just that it's better. It's that intrinsic motivation evaporates in the face of extrinsic motivators. Or to put it differently, the more you reward people for doing something, the more they tend to lose interest in whatever they had to do to get the reward. And so if you wanted to, I'm sorry, I've been rambling too long. Go ahead.
Oh no, actually, you were great. I have this like list of questions, and you're just like knocking them off. And I don't even have to ask questions. But I was wondering if you would talk about in the book Punished by Rewards. You have a Pizza Hut and reading example that I thought maybe illustrated your point that you were just talking about in extrinsic motivation, sort of dampening one's interest in reading.
Right. So the Pizza Hut company came up with a program many years ago called Book It, in which kids get a free slice of pizza for every so many books that they read. And I remember talking to a researcher who originally from New Zealand named John Nichols. And I said, you're one of the experts on this. What's your guess as to the likely effects of this program? And he said, my guess is a lot of fat kids who don't like to read. I can still hear his voice saying that. If you wanted to destroy children's love of reading, you would give them a prize for reading a book. That could be pizza, it could be a trophy, it could be $1, it could be an A, or it could be a good job. I like how good a reader you are. These are all ways of controlling people. And even though they may work in the short run to get the compliance, in this case, getting through a book, kids have now learned reading must be something I would hate. That's why they have to bribe me to do it. And by the way, what's true of reading is true of just about anything else you can think of, including sharing, being helpful. Research has found that kids whose parents often reward them, which can be done not only with gold stars, stickers, candy bars, but also with praise, are less generous and caring than their peers.
That was shocking to me when I read about that. And I think like, not only do I remember growing up in a household that we got a lot of praise. We were very like a positive discipline household, but also with my own daughter, giving her praise when she does anything like sharing, or she has complex medical needs. So we have a lot of like weird problems that aren't other people's problems. But can you talk like why that might be, why getting a reward for doing something sort of disincentivize one's actual intrinsic enjoyment of that thing?
I think there are basically two reasons. One, I just mentioned very quickly, which is the message that it sends out. If I'm getting a reward, that devalues whatever I had to do to get it. It sends the message, this is something bad, you won't like it. That's why they have to reward me to do it. The other reason is that rewards, like punishments, are ways of controlling children. And even though kids may want the goodie, the food, the dessert, or the sticker, or tragically, the love and affection, which many parents make contingent on jumping through the parent's hoop. They turn love into a kind of, they attach strings to it. That's known as conditional parenting, which research shows is destructive in all kinds of ways, even though parents obviously didn't mean for it to have that effect. But even though kids want the goodie itself, they don't want what they desire turned into a lever to manipulate them. Kids don't, like adults, don't want to be controlled. You're not the boss of me. They want their autonomy. And so they distance themselves from whatever they had to do to get that. I believe those are the two reasons. There may be another reason, other reasons as well, but whatever the explanation is, the research is very clear. The more you reward people for doing something, the more they lose interest in it. And by the way, that often leads to loss of excellence at it, which is why bonus plans, incentive schemes, pay for performance in the workplace undermine the quality of work that people do, just as research shows that grades and other rewards not only make kids less excited about learning in school, but also lead to shallower thinking than kids lucky enough to have teachers who don't use grades or other rewards at all. Their intrinsic motivation and curiosity is intact. as opposed to the systematic way we undermine kids' generosity, just as we undermine their interest in reading and learning by trying to manipulate them with rewards, including verbal rewards.
I think something that really felt deeply true that you talk about in the book for me was when you talk about babies being innately curious and human beings being innately curious, and then not necessarily, and then we're trained to want these rewards and these consequences. It felt like, oh my gosh, very like an eye-opening way. But so for those of us who have been like indoctrinated into the system of only doing things for external validation, how can you kind of talk about what you think that that's done for us as a culture or as a society at whole? Maybe that's too big of a question.
It's a big question, but in a way it's one that almost answers itself, because all we have to do is list some of the things that trouble us about the society we live in and the attitudes people have, and people saying, what are you going to give me if I do, and so on, or people who seem not very excited by things that used to excite them, and you have the answer to your question. Many of these things are due precisely to systems, not just bad attitudes, but systems locked into place that are all about rewarding and punishing, and which is to say, doing things to people and controlling them. The opposite of this is not a hands-off, laissez-faire, permissive attitude where kids do whatever they want, just as another one of the sort of straw men that's tossed at this critique is to suggest that, oh, if you don't praise kids, then you're just going to glower and scowl at them all day and not say anything to them. And that sounds chilly and unloving. Exactly the opposite is true. With respect to the first, adults, teachers, and parents have a more challenging and ultimately, I think, exhilarating role to play with kids by working with them to help them solve problems, to respond to their needs. The basic question parents need to ask is not, how do I get my kids to do what I demand? It's, what does my child need? And how can I help to meet those needs? That difference in the questions, which has to do with goal, is more important than just shifting the method. And that's harder. It's harder to figure out how you work with a kid. I mean, kids learn to make good decisions by making decisions, not by following directions. But rewards and punishments of any kind are all about getting them to follow directions. And with respect to the second sort of mischaracterization or caricature of what I and other people are saying, is this is not unloving or critical at all. I mean, sure, there are people, maybe you're one of them based on what you said before, who say, you know, I'm glad my parents praised me, or I wish they had praised me more. But that's often based on a black and white view that the opposite of praise is either criticism or silence. The real opposite of praise, which is this patronizing pat on the head, conditional affection. The opposite of that is not silence. It's unconditional affection. It's hugs and smiles and affection and approval and attention that kids never have to earn, because it's based on who they are, not what they do. So it opens up a whole world of realizing that when you stop praising, it doesn't mean you're less loving. It means you start loving unconditionally, which is what kids actually require to flourish.
I think another thing that you talk about is that you need, as a parent, to quote unquote deal with your own shit so that you don't take, I think a lot of our parenting skills are very reactionary or like instinctual from like how we were raised or what we know about parenting. But can you talk a little bit about the obligation of the parent in figuring out how to respond to what's actually going on?
The obligation of the parent?
Well, I think one should be obligated to, you want the best for your child, and you, I feel like that there is you do have an obligation to each other to try to deliver that. And that's what I mean by obligation.
I see. Well, I mean, that seems, to me, it seems like a sort of, the word to me, if I'm hearing it as a parent, makes me just think about demands that are placed on me that are going to be very difficult to fulfill, but that I have to in order to meet someone else's standard. But maybe that's just a matter of the particular word. I come at it slightly differently when I do a workshop with parents. And I do this also, I talk about this at the beginning of my book, Unconditional Parenting, is to ask, what are your long-term goals for your kids? How would you like them to turn out years from now? Think of a word or a phrase that captures how you hope, your child will be. And I get the same answers to that everywhere I go. Well, I want my kid to be happy, to be ethical, to be caring and compassionate, but also to be independent and self-reliant, to be curious, creative, a critical thinker, successful, stuff like that. So what I do for a living is I say to people, not here's your obligation because I say it's good, but rather here's what you just said you wanted for your kid. Here's the arguments and the research showing that traditional parenting gets in the way of what you yourself just said you wanted. One example I mentioned a few minutes ago was kids who are praised or rewarded a lot become more selfish. They've been taught the reason to help people, the only reason, is because of what I'll get out of it, a good job or a sticker or a candy bar. If you want kids to be responsible, you have to give them responsibilities rather than manipulating them. If you want kids to love learning, you have to stop killing it by giving them grades, and so on. And so this can be seen more as liberating than just as burdensome when parents realize that much of what they're being told by traditional parenting books and by their mothers-in-law and their friends and so on is not supported by good research and is based on trying to give an answer to the question, how do I get compliance? Rather than how do I help my kid become happy and ethical and caring and responsible?
Can you briefly talk about this in the context of, say, the like Angela Duckworth or the growth mindset or drive? How this sort of theory kind of is similar but yet very different.
Very, very different. In fact, I wrote a piece which is on my website, like all my articles, it's there for free, which is called The Mindset. And there's another one on grit in particular. I forget the exact wording of the title.
We will link to those for sure.
Oh, thanks. So Angela Duckworth is a deeply conservative person who is more about getting persistence at whatever tasks people are given to do than asking whether the tasks make sense and who decided. I'm more the latter, where I'm asking the Latin question, cui bono? Who does this benefit? Who benefits when you're told you got to stick with one musical instrument and keep at it for years, whether it gives you joy or not, rather than sampling many kinds of music? Because she says explicitly, that's what her value set, that's what's a good thing to do. Grit is just a sort of reworking of very old notions of found in Aesop's fables and Benjamin Franklin's almanac, and Christian denunciations of sloth about persistence and so on. People don't need to have grit when they're doing something they love. And so, when you present a child with a worksheet to do in school, for example, the Angela Duckworths and the Carol Dwecks, who talk about growth mindset and so on, would like kids to say, by golly, if I give this my all and keep at it and show a lot of effort, I'll bet I could succeed. Whereas I think the appropriate question to ask is, why does anybody have to do this garbage? And how come I had no say in the matter? The more you're focused on things like grit, self-regulation, persistence, a growth mindset, which is mindset means it's about the kid's attitude. The more you're blaming the people who are victims of the system, and the less likely you are to ask the hard questions about who came up with the task and whether we want to go beyond compliance, both at home and at school.
I think that you talk a bit about sort of what you use the 3 C's, right? Towards the end of the book on sort of how to foster or set up environments to work with people or children. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, maybe this can be our last question is that, so the 3 C's I talk about are content, collaboration, and choice. Content moves directly from what I was just saying a minute ago. When kids don't do what we tell them to do, a lot of the time the problem is what we've told them to do, not with the kid. And by the way, that sounds easy to say. And
no, it's a radical idea.
A lot of people know it is a radical idea. That's
Sorry.
right. And because almost all parenting books begin with the premise that whatever you as the parent want your kid to do, that's legitimate. And now I'll give you some tricks for making them do it. Whereas in my book on conditional parenting, I begin by saying, the problem may be with the task. A lot of parents will say, for example, if I can't use punishments and rewards, how do I get my kid to clean up his room?
I mean,
and my response is not to find you a slightly nicer technique. My response is to say, I thought it was his room. Why does he have to keep it up to your standards? The whole premise needs to be questioned here. And the same thing is especially true at school with, slogging through textbooks and cramming forgettable facts into short-term memory for a test and so on. That's the problem. It's not that kids lack motivation. It's that you're resorting to extrinsic motivators, which kill intrinsic motivation, because the content is the problem. And the second C is collaboration, which is how we work with our kids to solve things that go wrong and to come up with ideas and plans and goals, and especially collaboration among kids in a classroom setting, because the best classrooms are distinguished by kids learning from and with one another in pairs and small groups most of the time, rather than just alone at their desk, or worse, the most destructive arrangement, set against each other in a race so that other kids have to fail in order for me to succeed. And the third C is choice, which is that idea of autonomy, and how we need to not only stop doing the controlling stuff like bribes and threats, but affirmatively, proactively provide kids with more say about what they're doing in their lives and support their autonomy. When you have an environment, a family, a classroom, or even a workplace for adults that are characterized by those 3 C's, you don't have to treat them like pets anymore to get them to do things.
Okay, so I know there's like a million questions about those. And also we decided that that last question was going to be the last one. Can I squeeze one tiny one more in,
Sure.
Mr. Kohn? I just wanted you to briefly talk about if you have hope for the future. Or
that's a predictive question, and I'm not very good at predicting. Saying you have hope or lack hope for the future tends to assume a kind of fatalism, that life is like a movie that's just going to unroll and it'll turn out good or bad. But that overlooks the extent to which it depends on what we do. The future for our own families, the whole future for our society depends on whether people take a look at their values, question what they've been doing, and decide we can do it a different way, or become cynics who throw up their hands and say there's nothing you can do, or that sounds good in theory, but in the real world, which is a way of, the more people say that, the more hopeless I become. But the more people say, gulp, what you've said makes me very uncomfortable, so I'm going to have to rethink what I've been doing. The more people say that, the more hopeful I become.
That was a lovely answer. Thank you so much for doing this with me. I'm really excited and honored to be able to share your work. And people like you give me hope for the future and rethinking the possibilities of how we can create a caring, creative, understanding world. Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate your interest in this, and thanks for saying that.
Take care.